BBC One.
A summary of the news now on BBC One Wales with Nicholas Witchell.
A car bomb has exploded in an Israeli town. 20 people have been hurt. But despite this latest attack in Netanya, Middle East peace moves are continuing. 8 people dead, 200 injured in a fire tragedy in the Netherlands. And 30 years on, the secret story of the British government, Bobby Moore and a bracelet. Good evening. More than 20 people were injured tonight when a car bomb exploded in Israel. One person is said to be in a critical condition. The attack happened in the coastal resort of Netanya, about 18 miles north of Tel Aviv. But despite this attack, there's more promising news about the peace process. The Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat is to go to Washington tomorrow to meet President Clinton. Reporting first on the attack in Netanya, our Middle East correspondent Paul Adams.
The smouldering aftermath of this latest attack on an Israeli city. A powerful explosion spreading debris across the street. The car, which police say was stolen 3 months ago, was blown apart. The blast tore through the shopping district of this bustling coastal city. The explosives were homemade. Miraculously, most of the injuries are not serious. As the bomb squad checked for further devices, the police said the bomber might be among the wounded. Israel's new police chief, appointed just today, said the authorities were expecting attacks of this kind. This is the second bomb blast inside Israel in just 5 days. With a prime ministerial contest less than 6 weeks away, memories of a pre-election wave of suicide bombing in 1996 are gradually being stirred. Word of the bombing came as the Prime Minister met cabinet colleagues and security officials in Jerusalem. There was no word on what, if any, action the government plans to take. But tonight comes some startling news. After a phone call from President Clinton earlier in the day, Yasser Arafat has decided to travel to Washington immediately. After days of uncertainty surrounding President Clinton's latest peace proposals, it seems Mr. Arafat has heard something encouraging. At this unlikely hour, the peace process may be back on track. But the Israeli and Palestinian leaders still have mountains to climb and people to convince. This was another day of funerals. 22-year-old Tahrir Rizk was one of 10 people killed in the last 5 days. Any deal reached in negotiations after so much bloodshed is going to be hard to sell. Paul Adams, BBC News, Jerusalem.
Well, a short time ago I spoke to Paul Adams in Jerusalem and asked him first about the bomb attack in Netanya. Was there any indication yet of who had carried it out?
Well, inevitably, the finger is pointed at a lot of the usual suspects. Certainly, the police will be looking at possible connections to militant Islamic groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Also, there were questions asked to Israeli officials tonight whether they thought that the fact that this was today had been marked the anniversary of Fatah Day, the founding of Yasser Arafat's Fatah faction, whether there might be a connection there. Ministers are not ruling that out either. But for the moment, it is all speculation, no clue, and certainly no claim of responsibility so far.
Turning now to Mr. Arafat's very sudden decision to go to Washington tomorrow. Peace process may be back on track, you said in your report. How much significance do you think we can invest in this development?
Well, I think it is a very significant development because we've been waiting for some days now to see whether Yasser Arafat could find it in himself to go to Washington to discuss the peace proposals put forward by President Clinton to Israeli and Palestinian negotiators a little over a week ago. Up to now, the Palestinians have been saying there simply isn't enough detail here. We do not want to sign on to something that might, in effect, sign away our rights before the negotiating process begins. I think that Yasser Arafat has heard something from President Clinton that makes him think that there is that this is a worthwhile process, that these proposals do offer the prospect of a way forward. And if this works, we may well see Ehud Barak, Israel's Prime Minister, following in Yasser Arafat's footsteps with a possible summit between all three sometime in the near future.
A New Year's party in the Netherlands ended in tragedy when a fire in the cafe where it was being held killed 8 people. More than 200 others were injured, some with severe burns, in the fire in the town of Volendam. The fire swept through the cafe, which was packed with partygoers just after midnight.
Volendam is a close community,
And a tragedy like this one touches almost everybody. Candles have been lit for those who died. There are prayers for the injured, some barely hanging on to life. In this fishing village, New Year will be a time of terrible memories.
Complete disaster here for this village. And it will be in the next years, will be the talk of the day. The 1st of January will ever be reminded for this big disaster.
Fire broke out in the crowded cafe bar just after midnight. Emergency exits were locked. Even the windows couldn't all be opened. Young party-goers suffered terrible injuries. Many were badly burned. Others had broken bones from jumping clear. It's thought the fire may have started in Christmas decorations above the dancers.
People fell on the ground. People were walking over other people. People were lying over each other, on each other. And the panic was very large.
Police and fire experts have been working through the wrecked building for evidence. The Christmas decorations were supposed to have been made flame-proof in advance. This cafe bar was a building whose emergency exits were locked shut and whose windows were difficult to open. The Dutch have rules about safety, but they weren't observed. The feeling here is that this is a tragedy which should never have happened. Colin Blaine, BBC News, Volendam.
Police in the Irish Republic have recovered the bodies of 2 children from the waters of an ice-covered lake. The children hadn't been seen since they set off for the lake to go skating yesterday afternoon. The girls were cousins, Louise McAloon, who was 12, and Veronica McAloon, who was 10. The tragedy happened on Hollywood Lake near Monaghan Town.
The search for the 2 girls was itself a difficult operation. The ice still 2 inches thick on Hollywood Lake, but melting fast. The 2 cousins, aged 10 and 12, had set off to the lake, saying they were going skating. But the thaw was already setting in when they disappeared yesterday afternoon. A Coast Guard helicopter with heat-seeking equipment flew overhead, but as time went on, hope was diminishing that the 2 girls would be found alive. The helicopter had spotted 2 holes in the ice. The girls' bodies were found nearby, lying close to each other in 10 feet of water.
The frost we had over the last few days was quite severe, and I suppose there is an attraction there to experiment with ice. This morning the thaw set in and the ice is breaking up. It will be extremely dangerous, and possibly yesterday it would have been quite dangerous because the thaw set in early yesterday morning.
Elsewhere, off the southwest coast of Ireland, a rescue at sea. A fishing boat, the Pembroke, lost its rudder and started taking in water in rough weather. Her crew of 13 were airlifted to safety by the Navy. In the southwest of England, a day of flooding, the result of melting snow and heavy rain. The River Axe in Devon burst its banks, washing away part of a bridge. A helicopter was needed to rescue a fireman from a tree after he was nearly swept away. And tonight at Ripley in Hampshire, the sandbags are out again. Another surge of floodwater for a village that's been repeatedly flooded for much of the last 6 weeks. Valerie Jones, BBC News.
Princess Margaret is still thought to be awaiting the results of medical tests after spending much of the holiday period in bed at the Queen's estate at Sandringham. Buckingham Palace has stressed there is no cause for alarm.
Princess Margaret's been unwell for some time, and as was the case in March last year, she's sometimes forced to use a wheelchair. The hope is these medical tests will pinpoint the precise nature of her latest illness. It's thought to be a physical problem she's suffering from, rather than anything to do with the bouts of depression she has recently experienced. 3 years ago, on the Caribbean island of Mustique, she had a mild stroke, and then in 1999 she suffered another setback when she badly burnt her feet in a bath of scalding water. Throughout the holiday period, the princess missed the church services attended by other members of the royal family. At the time, it was said she was tired. She's been seen by a doctor twice and remains in bed. Princess Margaret is being looked after at Sandringham, the Queen's Norfolk estate. Buckingham Palace say at the moment there's no suggestion she'll have to go to hospital, and her illness is being viewed as a cause for concern rather than alarm. It's not known if the medical test results will be made public. Peter Hunt, BBC News.
Cabinet records from 1970 are published today and reveal new details about the former England football captain Bobby Moore's arrest for allegedly stealing a bracelet in Colombia. It was just before the World Cup, and the papers show how the then Labour government exerted pressure on the Colombians to get him released. Moore was eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. Our political correspondent Nicholas Jones reports.
Bobby Moore, England captain for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico, became the focus for intense diplomatic activity after being arrested for allegedly stealing an emerald bracelet. He was being held in Colombia and was freed only days before the World Cup.
I'm now delighted that the thing has been cleared and that I can be joining the rest of the lads in the preparation for the matches.
The hijacking of 3 planes by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, who took them to the remote Dawson's Field airstrip in Jordan, opened up a new chapter in international terrorism. 65 Britons were among the hostages, but a 4th hijack went wrong, and one of the terrorists, Laila Khaled, was held in London. The records reveal the secret negotiations behind the deal for her release. The 1970 general election was an upset for Labour, who were defeated unexpectedly by Edward Heath.
The Queen has asked me to form the next government.
But within days, the docks were at a standstill, and the records show how the cabinet dithered over sending in the troops, fearing widespread disruption which had been indicated in secret reports from the security services. They'd infiltrated shop stewards' meetings. Edward Heath, later defeated after a miners' strike, was dogged by industrial disputes. Nicholas Jones, BBC News.
Football, and the Sunderland striker Kevin Phillips strengthened his claim to an England place with an impressive performance for his side against Ipswich in the Premiership. Phillips scored his 12th goal of the season and set up another in Sunderland's 4-1 victory, which lifted them to 3rd place in the table. The games between Charlton and Arsenal, Liverpool and Southampton, and Manchester United and West Ham are featured on Match of the Day immediately after this programme, so if you don't want to know those scores, look away now. In the nationwide First Division, Bolton closed the gap on leaders Fulham to 7 points after beating Preston 2-0. Their best goal was the first, scored by Gareth Farrelly. Fulham lost 2-0 at Stockport. Hundreds of thousands of revellers braved severe weather to welcome in the new year. In Edinburgh, the traditional Hogmanay street party was marked with a spectacular firework display. And in London, thousands converged on Trafalgar Square despite freezing temperatures and rain. Emma Simpson reports.
The midnight gun and the start of Edinburgh's New Year's celebrations. This was Britain's biggest street party, around 100,000 revellers out in force. As the new year dawned in London, thousands packed Trafalgar Square, but there were no official celebrations laid on in the heart of this capital. But in other parts of Europe, famous landmarks were the backdrop for some major parties. New Yorkers ushered in 2001 with a blizzard of ticker tape. And at the world's tallest building in Malaysia, thousands watched as parachutists jumped at the stroke of midnight. More than a dozen followed, and they all survived.
That was so cool, man!
Emma Simpson, BBC News.
And that's it. There'll be news throughout the night over on BBC News 24, but from all of us, good night.
Good evening to you. The freeze is well and truly behind us now, and we're back to the all too familiar pattern of low pressure, and that means to say often quite wet and often quite windy, although I suppose on the plus side at least it will be fairly mild, and that area of low pressure is going to be around for the next few days at least. At the moment the winds are coming up from the south, they're fairly mild. They're quite strong too, and we're going to have some pretty gusty winds across the English Channel, for instance, during the rest of the night. Later on tomorrow the wind's swinging around more to the west and the northwest, so a little bit of a chill coming back, but nothing compared to the last few days. Now the main problem at the moment are the heavy showers and the strong winds. They're more particularly affecting southern England and South Wales, although there are some heavy showers further north. They've been gathering, as you can see here on the radar, in western areas, and the whole band of these showers will be working their way eastwards during the rest of the night, with the low pressure persisting. Most of the showers will be in the west, but the odd rogue one I think will come through to eastern areas, even the odd clap of thunder, more particularly near the south coast. But a much milder night than we've had just recently, lowest temperatures 4 or 5 degrees or so. Tomorrow for the south of the country it'll be a case of sunshine and showers, some quite heavy ones too. The heaviest ones working their way across in a band during the course of the day. In the more northern areas some thicker clouds, some more general cloud and some longer spells of rain, but a fairly mild day just about everywhere. The unsettled theme continues, another showery day to come across much of the country on Wednesday and some more general wet and windy weather reaching the south on Thursday.